For a while, all was silent. He walked to Xiao Xingchen's motionless body. As he looked down, the upward quirk of his lips gradually fell, and multitudes of thin blood vessels crept over the whites of his eyes. Perhaps Wangxian had seen things wrong, but the rims of Xue Yang's eyes seemed tinted red. A moment later, Xue Yang let out a vicious hiss through clenched teeth. "You forced me to do it." He finished with a cold laugh. "It's better that he's dead," he said to himself. "He won't be obedient unless he's dead." Xue Yang checked Xiao Xingchen's breathing and felt his wrist, as though the man's demise wasn't clear enough. He wasn't stiff enough. Then Xue Yang stood, went into the bedroom beside him, and came out carrying a basin of water. With a clean towel, he wiped the blood from Xiao Xingchen's face until it was pristine, and even changed his bandages. Delicately, he wound the cloth around Xiao Xingchen's eyes. He drew a spell circle on the ground and placed the required materials, then carried Xiao Xingchen's corpse inside, careful to arrange it properly. Only after he finished did he remember to treat and bind his own abdominal wound. Xue Yang probably believed he would be able to see Xiao Xingchen again in just a short while, so his mood grew more and more cheerful. He picked up the fallen fruits and vegetables from the ground and put them back into the basket, stacking them neatly. In a fit of great diligence, he even cleaned the whole house and placed a new layer of straw inside A-Qing's coffin. Finally, he pulled out the piece of candy that Xiao Xingchen had given him the previous evening. Just as he was about to pop it into his mouth, he thought for a moment and reined himself in, putting it back. Sitting by the table, he rested his chin on one hand and endured the tedious wait for Xiao Xingchen to sit up. But however long he waited, it didn't happen. The sky grew darker, and Xue Yang's expression grew bleaker and bleaker with it. He tapped his fingers against the table impatiently. When twilight had completely fallen, he was still waiting. He kicked the table and cursed, then stood up. Walking over to Xiao Xingchen's corpse, he half knelt beside it and checked the spell circle and the incantations he had drawn earlier. Even after repeatedly examining them, there seemed to be no mistake, so he frowned and ruminated. Better just to erase and redraw everything. This time, Xue Yang sat directly on the floor and scrutinized Xiao Xingchen patiently. Again, he waited for a long, long time. By this point, A-Qing's feet had already gone through 3 cycles of numbness and had started to hurt, itching as though a million swarming ants were biting down on them. She had cried so much, her eyes were swollen, and everything was a little blurred. After another couple of hours, Xue Yang finally discovered that the situation was no longer under his control. He placed his hand on Xiao Xingchen's forehead. Closing his eyes, he probed the corpse for a long while before abruptly opening his eyes again. Wangxian knew what Xue Yang had discovered, that, unfortunately, only a few faint wisps of Xiao Xingchen's shattered spirit remained. Plus, a thoroughly broken soul could never be turned into a fierce corpse. The possibility of such an accident apparently hadn't occurred to Xue Yang in the slightest. That always smiling face turned blank for the first time. Possessed by newfound hindsight, he instinctively pressed his hands against the wound on Xiao Xingchen's neck. However, the blood had long since drained out of Xiao Xingchen's body, and his face was already as white as paper. A large portion of his neck was covered in dried, dark red blood. Trying to close the wound now was completely futile. Xue Yang had already died, utterly and completely. Even his soul was smashed to pieces. The wailing, dessert-deprived version of Xue Yang from his story was so far removed from the Xue Yang of the present, it was very difficult to connect them. But at that moment, Wangxian finally saw a glimpse of the witless and ignorant child in the young man's face. In an instant, Xue Yang's eyes were bloodshot. He stood abruptly, both hands clenched into tight fists. Rampaging violently around the coffin home, he hurled and pummeled and broke and crashed into everything, throwing the house he himself had tidied up earlier into raucous chaos. At that moment, the noises he made and the expression on his face were more vicious and deranged than in all his previous displays of insane malice put together. After he finished smashing up the house, he calmed down again. Squatting down where he had started, he whispered, "Xue Yang. If you don't wake up now, I'll make your dear friend Song Lan start murdering people," he went on. "I'll kill everyone in this entire city and turn them all into living corpses. You've lived here for so long. Can you really look the other way? I'll strangle that little blind girl, A-Qing, alive and leave her corpse out in the wilderness so the wild dogs can gnaw at her until all that remains are broken little pieces." Silently, A-Qing shivered. When no one answered, Xue Yang suddenly flew into a rage. "Xue Yang!" he roared. In vain, he tugged on the collar of Xue Yang's robes, shaking him, his eyes fixed on the face of the corpse in his hands. Abruptly, he tugged Xue Yang's arms and hauled him over his back. Carrying the corpse, he exited the coffin home. Spirit-locking pouch, spirit-locking pouch, he muttered over and over again like a madman. "All right, spirit-locking pouch. I need a spirit-locking pouch. Spirit-locking pouch, spirit-locking pouch." Only after he had walked far, far away did A-Qing have the nerve to make the slightest motion. She stood, but her legs were unsteady. She tumbled back to the ground, struggling before managing to climb back up again. With great difficulty, she took a few steps forward. As she continued, her tendons and muscles loosened, and she sped up, walking faster and faster, faster and faster, until finally she was running. She ran a very long time, only daring to let out the wrenching sobs that she had buried in her stomach once Yi City was far behind her. "Daozhang! Daozhang!" she cried. "Daozhang!" The scene before her eyes changed, and suddenly she was elsewhere. By this point, A-Qing had probably been on the run for some time. She walked into an unfamiliar town, holding her bamboo pole and pretending once again that she was blind. "Please, is there a major cultivation clan in the area?" she asked a passerby. "Please, are there any powerful cultivators nearby?" She's looking for someone who can help her avenge Xue Yang, Wangxian thought. But to no avail. Not a single person took her inquiry seriously. Most said only a few perfunctory words before walking away. However, A-Qing was not discouraged. Patiently and tirelessly, she continued asking and asking, but continued to be greeted with a dismissive hand. Realizing that she couldn't glean any information here, she followed a small trail out of town. Walking and asking questions the whole day had exhausted her. Dragging her heavy feet, she made her way to the bank of a little creek. She cupped the creek water in her hands and drank a few mouthfuls to moisten her burning throat. As she looked down into the water, she saw the wooden hairpin in her hair. She reached toward her head and removed it. Her hairpin had originally been a very crude thing, resembling an uneven chopstick. But Xia Xingchen had whittled the surface down for her until it was flat, smooth, and slender. At one end, he had even carved a little fox with a pair of big eyes and a pointed, smiling face. When A-Qing had received her hairpin, she had felt it and said joyously, "Oh, it's a lot like me." As she looked at the hairpin, her lips puckered and she wanted to cry again. Her stomach began to rumble, so she reached into her robes and pulled out a little white money pouch, the same one she had stolen from Xia Xingchen. She dug out a piece of candy from inside and gave it a careful lick. When she tasted its sweetness on the tip of her tongue, she returned it to the pouch. This was the last piece of candy he had left for her. A-Qing looked downward as she put the pouch away. As her gaze brushed over the water, she suddenly noticed another person's reflection in the creek. Xue Yang's image smiled as it watched her. Terrified, A-Qing let out a shriek and frantically tried to scramble away. She didn't know when Xue Yang had appeared behind her back. He held Shuanghua in his hands, his arms outstretched as though about to embrace her. "A-Qing, why are you running?" he said cheerfully. "We haven't seen each other in so long. Don't you miss me?" "Help! Save me!" she shouted. But she was on a narrow path winding through a remote wilderness. No help would come. Xue Yang raised an eyebrow. "I was coming back after finishing some business in Xue Yang. To my surprise, I just happened to run across you while you were running around town asking questions. You really can't stop fate even if you want to, huh? Back to the main point. You're genuinely a terrific actor. You even had me fooled for so long. Amazing." A-Qing already knew that there was no hope of escape. She was undoubtedly going to die. Once her paroxysms of fear had passed, it occurred to her that since she was going to die anyway, it was better if she cursed him out to her heart's content before she went. A tide of vulgar spirit rose within her, and she leapt up and spat at him. "You bastard, evil-eyed snake, worthless animal. Your parents must have had you in a pigsty. How else could they have produced a son of a bitch like you? You're nothing but a rotten fetus who managed to grow big eating filth." Having previously lived right in the middle of the urban rough and tumble, A-Qing had witnessed more than her share of foul-mouthed shouting matches. Thus she continued to spit all kinds of obscenities directly at Xue Yang's face. He listened to them with a smile. "You're really good at hurling curses. Why didn't I ever hear you make such a scene in front of Xia Xingchen? Do you have more?" "Fuck off, you repulsive, shameless piece of shit," she roared. "How dare you bring up Dao Zhang? That's Dao Zhang's sword. How could someone like you possibly deserve to hold it? You're soiling his belongings." With his left hand, Xue Yang raised Shuanghua. "Oh, are you talking about this? It's mine now. Do you think your Dao Zhang was so pure and untainted? From today onward, he'll be yours, my ass. Keep dreaming, as though you have any right to say whether he's tainted. You're no more than a glob of drool and bile. Dao Zhang only got splattered by you because he had 8 lives worth of bad luck dropped on him at once. The only dirty thing is you. You disgusting wad of pus." Xue Yang's expression finally fell. For so long, A-Qing had run from him with her heart lodged in her throat and her guts dangling over her empty pit of a stomach. But now that the moment had finally arrived, she suddenly felt her spirits lift and her heart became unburdened. "Since you love pretending to be blind so much," Xue Yang said darkly, "why not be blind for real this time?" He waved his hand and sent a spray of mysterious powder flying into her eyes. Immediately, her vision turned blood red before fading into darkness. Stinging pain blanketed A-Qing's burning eyeballs, and she let out an ear-splitting shriek. She heard the sound of Xue Yang's voice. "You're too mouthy, and your tongue moves too much. I don't think we need to keep that thing around." She felt the bone-chilling touch of a sharp object entering her mouth. Just as Wangxian felt a stab of pain at the base of A-Qing's tongue, someone abruptly pulled him out. The clear, crisp tinkling of the silver bells sounded right beside Wangxian's ear, but still thoroughly submerged in A-Qing's emotions, he was unable to regain full consciousness for a long, long time. The sky and the earth spun before his eyes. Lan Jingyi stuck his hand out and waved it in front of his face. He's not reacting. He couldn't have broken his brain, could he? Just like I said, empathy's very dangerous, Jinling said. Like your mind didn't wander off thinking about who knows what just then. You didn't ring the bell on time, Lan Jingyi replied. Jinling's expression stiffened. Fortunately, at that moment, Wangxian finally started showing signs of life. Sluggishly, he rose, clinging to the coffin for support. A-Qing clung to the side of the coffin as well, having already left his body. Like a litter of piglets, the juniors encircled them, and a dozen tongues began wagging at once. He got up. Thank goodness he didn't break his brain. Wasn't his brain already broken in the first place? Don't talk nonsense. The voices twittered and buzzed inside Wangxian's ears. Don't make so much noise. My head's swimming. Hastily they quieted. He looked down and stuck his hand inside the coffin, parting the neatly arranged collar of Xiao Xingchen's robe slightly. Sure enough, he saw a thin gash on the man's neck at the site of the fatal injury. Wangxian sighed internally, then turned to A-Qing. We've troubled you. Though A-Qing's spirit was blind, unlike an ordinary blind person, her movements were not slow and careful, as she had only become truly blind the moment before she died. The entire time prior to her passing, she had been a lively, energetic girl, swift as the wind. She had been alone these past years, hiding and ducking about Yi City amidst the enchanted fog. She fought Xue Yang, vanishing and reappearing like the ghost that she was, scaring away anyone living who entered the city, alerting them to the danger, leading them out. How much courage had that taken? How much tenacity? Propped up on the side of the coffin, A-Qing pressed her palms together and bowed repeatedly to Wangxian. Afterwards, with her bamboo pole serving as her sword, she made the kill, kill, kill gesture she had often used when causing a ruckus. Don't worry, Wangxian said. He addressed all of the disciples. Stay here. The walking corpses in the city won't come to this coffin home. I'll be back in a little bit. What in the world did you see during empathy? Lan Jingyi blurted out. It's a long story. I'll explain later. You can't summarize it? Stop dangling it in front of our faces without telling us, Jinling exclaimed. No problem. In short, Xue Yang must die, Wangxian replied. In the midst of the mystical fog that clouded the eye and blanketed the skies, the tap-tap of A-Qing's bamboo pole sounded, leading the way. Moving briskly, the man and the ghost returned to the scene of the fight. Lan Wangji and Xue Yang had already taken their confrontation outside. The lights of Bi-Chen and Zheng Zai's blades clashed. The battle had reached a critical point. Calm and unhurried, Bi-Chen steadily gained the upper hand. Meanwhile, Zheng Zai fought like a rabid dog, but with great effort, the sword was able to keep its opponent at bay. The dreadful white fog obscured Lanwangji's vision, whereas Xue Yang had lived in Yi City for many years. Like A-Qing, even with his eyes closed, he knew the streets like the back of his hand. Thus the two were deadlocked. From time to time, the Qin's furious cry resounded through the heavens, banishing the mob of walking corpses which sought to encircle them. Just as Wangxian was about to pull out his flute, two black silhouettes crashed in front of him like a pair of collapsing iron towers. When Ning pressed Song Lan against the ground, the two fierce corpses clutched each other's necks, their joints cracking loudly. "Hold him down," Wangxian said. He leaned over and rapidly felt through Song Lan's hair, searching for the two nails stuck in the corpse's skull. Relief washed over him when his fingers found the ends. This pair of nails was much thinner than the pair which had been hammered into Wen Ning's head. Plus they were made of different material, so restoring Song Lan's original consciousness wouldn't be too hard. Immediately, Wangxian pinched the ends of the nails and slowly began pulling them out. Feeling the foreign objects move in his head, Song Lan's eyes abruptly widened. He let out a low hiss, and Wen Ning was forced to press him down harder to prevent him from escaping. When the nails were finally wrenched free, Song Lan immediately collapsed on the ground, entirely immobile, paralyzed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. At that moment, a furious roar rang out from the battlefield. "Give him